Hi, this is Jessie Rogers reporting live from GSummit 2013 in San Francisco, and joining me today is Jim Gatto. Jim is a partner at Pillsbury Law, and he also leads the firm's social media, entertainment, and technology team. Welcome back, Jim.
Thank you, it's nice to be here.
You're a familiar face here at GSummit. You've been here since the beginning, really, with us. I often come to you with the same question. We have a lot of new companies coming to the show every year who are just beginning their engagement strategies. So what are some pointers that you can give companies just getting into this in terms of legal perspective and preparedness?
Right, so it's a great question, and one we get asked a lot. There are so many different legal issues that can come into play with these types of engagement activities that it really requires someone to understand the broad spectrum of the issues. Mm-hmm. And so from a company perspective, the single best thing that they can do is to speak with a knowledgeable attorney at the very beginning.
Right.
Because depending on how they implement their system and what features they're using, if they're using virtual currencies or not, or sweepstakes, there's just many, many different issues. And what we often will do is spend an hour or two with a company up front understanding what they want to do, and then we can identify the different issues that may apply based on what they're looking at and give them guidance on some do's and don'ts so that they, as they craft their program, they're doing it in a way that they've got the right guidance. And then we typically will look at it again before they implement it to see if they've made some changes and how that might impact the legal analysis.
Right. Well, some of the things that you mentioned are areas of particular expertise for you, and not every attorney is really familiar with the legislation around it. Things like virtual currency, redemptions with loyalty programs, et cetera. Can you elaborate a little on that?
Sure. I mean, that's one of the most difficult things for any one lawyer to really understand the wide range of laws that are there, and that's really one of the reasons that we formed the team that we did within our firm, the social media, entertainment, and technology team. We now have 70 attorneys that are focused on this space. And what I found was that as I was advising clients, there were areas that I understood kind of the business and some of the legal issues, but wasn't an expert in some of those areas like virtual currencies. We had lawyers in our firm that were experts in the financial regulatory issues in traditional monetary instruments. And so what we've done is we formed a team where people are now very focused on these issues, keeping abreast of the changes in the law, the changes in the business models, which is why we come to conferences like this and others, is to kind of stay abreast and be out front in thinking about where the legal issues are. We stay in close touch with many of the regulators and try to understand like what their hot buttons are and use that as a way to figure out how companies can kind of manage their risk. There's things that are clearly legal, things that are clearly illegal, and there's a lot of gray in between. And so that managing the risk is, how much risk are you willing to take, and how likely is it that you're doing something that might trigger a regulatory review, and finding that balance is different for each company.
Right. We were chatting earlier about social media, and a number of presenters at GSummit this year have talked about how social media has handed the reins over to the user or the viewer, and it's more difficult for companies to sort of control their message, control their IP, control the brand perception. What are some feelings you have about that?
Right, so that's a really interesting, so I get a question often that's, how is social media law different than just any other internet law?
Right.
I think the simplest way to put it is this, is that in the beginning, internet sites were one-way communication from company to consumer or company to business partner, and the companies controlled the content that was on their site. And so users went there and either consume content or engage in transactions that the company authorized. With social media, you have a much broader playing field and more interactions. So many companies now, you not only have your site and your content, but you have users putting content up on your site. Your site may be a platform where businesses are actually engaging with some of your users as well. Right. And so you have many different relationships now as opposed to the one-to-one. And this is what creates some of the complexity around the legal issues. So you mentioned user-generated content. It is a phenomenally powerful thing for brands to have consumers be able to post content and create value on their site, but with it comes potential cost. If you have consumers that are upset and they post things that you don't like, there's ways in which you can deal with it that can actually inflame the users more, and you want to avoid that. So part of it is legal, part of it is even just business sense and understanding the psyche of the social media users.
Good PR.
And then you have other issues where, if you have content that you're hosting on your site that users are uploading, Often there'll be, you look at sites like YouTube, there's a lot of content that isn't created by the users, and it actually is copyright infringement. And you actually have legal liability if you're hosting content on your site. But there's simple things that you can do to avoid that liability. There's a law called the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, which actually provides a shield for online copyright liability if you follow the steps that are outlined in the act. It doesn't apply automatically. You have to take a few affirmative steps, but it's a very simple thing to do. And if you look at the power of it, YouTube, in fact, was sued by Viacom for about $1 billion. And YouTube won on summary judgment. The judge said that it's not even going to trial,
right.
That YouTube was protected under the DMCA because they followed the steps rigorously.
Right.
There's some appeals on some of the issues, but that just goes to show how, knowing that law exists, knowing how to comply with it, is the old, ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Yeah, and that's a great example because of the sizable consequences potentially from that outcome.
Absolutely.
You blog about legal issues, you're a regular speaker. How can viewers find out more about your expertise?
Yeah, so come to conferences like this where we speak. We do have a blog at virtualworldlaw.com which covers a whole array of issues on social media and games and gamification and online gambling and a whole range of things that are really hot topics these days. And we try to just keep it relevant and fresh with kind of the most cutting edge legal issues and things you typically won't find many other places.
Great. I do have one last question, and it sort of occurred to me being at GSummit this year. We have an incredibly diverse international audience at the show. I know international law is an area of expertise for you too. What kind of tips can you offer to global organizations that cross cultural lines, cross legal lines, et cetera?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I mean, again, it's just that the law varies by country. So even like under copyright, you have different laws in the U.S. versus outside the U.S. Things that are very commonly used techniques in this area, like contests and sweepstakes, that are sometimes used in connection with gamification activities,
right.
Are illegal in certain countries. So again, it's a matter of understanding. When we talk to companies in the beginning, it's understanding not only what they're doing, but where they want to do it,
right.
and then bringing in the right experts. We have offices in London, Shanghai, Tokyo, Abu Dhabi, and we can advise in certain areas. And for the jurisdictions where we don't have lawyers on the ground, I'm actually the chair of, there's a group called the International Technology Lawyers Association,
Great.
Which is a lot of leading lawyers around the world, and I actually head their social media committee as well, and so there's very knowledgeable people there, so we often will refer work to one another as needed when we have work that need to be done in those jurisdictions and vice versa.
That's fantastic, what a great resource. What's your Twitter handle?
JD Jim.
JD Jim, excellent.
Yeah.
Jim, it is always such a pleasure and an education to talk to you. Fascinating topic. So glad to see you back at GSummit this year, and I know we're going to see you in the future as well.
Absolutely, such a pleasure. This was you always do great shows. This year was even better. You've outdone yourself, so it's
Excellent.
a pleasure to be here.
Growing every year.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in. This is Jessie Rogers signing off from GSummit 2013. Thanks a lot. That was great.
My pleasure.
Yeah, good stuff.
Yeah.
I clearly need to read some documentation.
Yeah,
get myself up to